For a lot of young horror fans, the most dangerous place wasn't a haunted house or a dark forest. It was school. Hallways, classrooms, prom, and graduation nights became the backdrop for revenge, slashers, supernatural payback, and full-blown chaos. These weren't just teen stories with scares added on. The school setting was the engine that made them work. From prom night disasters to twisted campus revenge and late-night cable staples, the VHS era gave us a whole wave of high school horror that felt raw, strange, and unforgettable. Tonight we're heading back to the lockers, the gymnasium, and the empty hallways after dark, with 10 high school horror movies from the VHS era that turned school into a danger zone. Carrie, 1976. Brian De Palma's Carrie, adapted from Stephen King's debut novel, is a horror tragedy about cruelty, repression, and revenge. At its heart is Carrie White, a painfully shy teenager tormented at school by bullies and at home by her fanatically religious mother. Played with heartbreaking vulnerability by Sissy Spacek, Carrie is both victim and powder keg, fragile, lonely, and simmering with a power she can barely control. De Palma structures the film like a pressure cooker. Each humiliation Carrie suffers pushes her closer to the breaking point, while her discovery of telekinesis adds a supernatural edge to her struggles. Piper Laurie's performance as Margaret White, Carrie's unhinged mother, is just as unforgettable, a woman so consumed by religious mania that she sees her daughter's growing independence as a sin to be crushed. The film builds to one of the most iconic climaxes in horror history, the prom sequence. What begins as Carrie's one fleeting chance at normalcy collapses into a nightmare of fire, blood, and psychic destruction. De Palma's split-screen shots and slow-motion editing heighten the chaos, turning a moment of teenage cruelty into an apocalypse of rage. Beyond the spectacle, Carrie is a story about the horrors of adolescence, of being different, of being unwanted, of discovering power in a world determined to crush you. It is as much a tragedy as it is a horror film, with Spacek's wide-eyed innocence making the devastation all the more painful. Prom Night, 1980. When people talk about the golden age of slashers, Prom Night often gets overshadowed by louder American titles. But this Canadian production helped shape the template just as much as any of them. It's a time capsule of disco, paranoia, and small-town secrets, wrapped in one of the most iconic horror setups of the era. The story begins with a tragedy, a young girl's accidental death during a cruel game. Years later, her classmates, now teenagers, are preparing for prom, unaware that someone hasn't forgotten what happened. As the night unfolds, a masked killer begins crossing names off the list, and the celebration turns into a slow, stylish panic. Jamie Lee Curtis headlines the cast, fresh off Halloween, and she grounds the movie with real charisma. But what makes Prom Night stand out is its atmosphere. Director Paul Lynch leans heavily on suspense and misdirection rather than gore, and the result feels more polished and moody than many of its American peers. Add in that unforgettable disco-drenched prom sequence, complete with full choreography, and you've got something that feels both ridiculous and hypnotic in the best way possible. There's also a subtle Canadian restraint beneath all the glitter and blood, a quieter tone, colder lighting, and a sense of guilt that gives the film its staying power. It's not just about revenge, it's about memory, shame, and how tragedy lingers long after the lights fade. Prom Night may look like another early 80s slasher, but there's something more deliberate and mature underneath. It's slick, sad, and surprisingly classy. A perfect example of how Canadian horror could dance to its own beat, even when drenched in disco lights. Graduation Day, 1981. Released at the height of the early slasher boom, Graduation Day was one of those tapes you'd spot sandwiched between bigger titles at the video store. The kind of movie you rented when you wanted something bloody and fast-paced. It kicks off with the sudden on-field death of a student-athlete, and soon her classmates and teachers are being picked off by a mysterious killer in the days leading up to graduation. What sets it apart from the dozens of slashers flooding theaters and rental shelves at the time is its quirky mix of sports imagery and traditional stalk-and-slash formula. Death scenes range from knives and swords to a fencing foil, keeping things inventive and unpredictable. The kills are often absurd, but that only added to its appeal for late-night audiences looking for fresh ways to see the formula twisted. Like many slashers of the time, the acting can be uneven, but the film makes up for it with energy and variety in its set pieces. Graduation Day may not have broken new ground, but it delivered exactly what rental-era horror fans wanted: a high body count, a bit of mystery, and a streak of dark humor. For anyone digging through the shelves in the early 80s, it was the kind of hidden gem that promised and delivered a night of gory fun. Massacre at Central High, 1976. High school becomes a war zone in this sharp, subversive cult thriller that turns teenage angst into political allegory. When a new student transfers to Central High, he finds a campus ruled by a trio of bullies who control the halls through intimidation. But when he finally strikes back, the social order collapses. And what replaces it is even more disturbing. Part revenge film, part moral fable, Massacre at Central High takes the familiar teen drama and twists it into something brutal and intelligent. Director Renee Daalder strips away adult authority entirely, leaving the students to form their own twisted hierarchy. What starts as rebellion quickly turns into a study of corruption and the cycle of power, a clever reflection of how easily victims can become oppressors. The film's low-budget production only enhances its stark, almost dreamlike tone. There's no music blasting or flashy editing, just quiet tension, empty hallways, and an atmosphere of inevitable collapse. It's the kind of movie that snuck into midnight programming and stuck with anyone who stumbled across it. Long before Heathers or Battle Royale, this film was already exploring how peer pressure and revenge can curdle into something apocalyptic. Massacre at Central High might wear the look of a simple exploitation flick, but beneath the surface, it's one of the most cynical and thought-provoking teen horror stories of its era. Slaughter High, 1986. Once bullied teenager Marty Ranson becomes the target of a cruel prank that goes horribly wrong. Years later, the classmates responsible reunite for what's supposed to be a casual get-together at their abandoned high school, only to find someone waiting, and he's brought a twisted sense of humor to the reunion. Slaughter High is a British-American slasher that somehow feels like it was shot inside a fever dream. The surreal dialogue, the synth-heavy score, and the exaggerated performances walks the line between parody and pure nastiness. Caroline Munro, one of the few familiar faces, gives the movie a strange touch of class amid the chaos. The film's tone is all over the place, in the best way possible. Sometimes mean-spirited, sometimes goofy, and occasionally downright atmospheric. The abandoned school setting feels genuinely haunted, with its decaying hallways and flickering lights giving everything an eerie, artificial glow. It's the kind of slasher that plays like a distorted memory of the 80s. Cheap, loud, and relentlessly odd. Slaughter High might not reinvent the genre, but it nails that VHS-era charm where every kill feels like it came straight off the rental shelf. Cutting Class, 1989. High school should be all about exams, sports, and social drama, but in this twisted slice of late 80s horror, it's about survival. After serving time in a mental institution, troubled student Brian Woods returns to campus, and almost immediately the bodies start piling up. Is he responsible, or is someone else hiding behind the mask of normal teenage life? Directed by Rospo Pallenberg, Cutting Class mixes slasher conventions with a streak of black comedy. The film is perhaps best remembered for featuring a young Brad Pitt in one of his earliest roles, playing the clean-cut basketball player caught in the chaos. Jill Schoelen, already a familiar face to horror fans from The Stepfather and Popcorn, stars as Paula, the final girl forced to unravel the mystery. Donovan Leitch rounds out the trio as Brian, the troubled classmate whose dark past casts suspicion over everything. The setting leans into classic slasher territory. Locker rooms, hallways, empty classrooms, and after-hours corridors become hunting grounds. Kill sequences are staged with a mix of camp and creativity. Lawn equipment, chemistry labs, and even the school mascot's suit are put to gruesome use. What gives Cutting Class its lasting cult appeal is the way it balances tongue-in-cheek humor with genuine tension. It knows the slasher formula well enough to play it straight, while also poking fun at high school stereotypes. Though it never reached the heights of the genre's classics, Cutting Class survives as a late 80s curiosity. A time capsule of teen horror where paranoia, camp, and early star power combine into something oddly unforgettable. Student Bodies. 1981, a masked killer known as the Breather stalks a high school, targeting students who break the unwritten rules of slasher movies. As the body count rises, deaths become increasingly absurd, household objects, unlikely accidents, and overcomplicated setups replacing genuine menace. A quiet student and her friends try to uncover the killer's identity before the school dance becomes the next disaster. Directed by Mickey Rose, Student Bodies is often cited as the first slasher parody, arriving before the genre had even worn out its welcome. The largely unknown cast plays everything straight, which is key to making the comedy land. Kristen Ritter anchors the film as the reluctant final girl, while the killer's exaggerated breathing becomes a running gag rather than a source of fear. The film constantly undercuts slasher mechanics. On-screen body counts interrupt scenes. Title cards announce deaths. A recurring character comments on the film's lack of nudity. The kills rely on practical effects designed to be ridiculous rather than shocking, turning everyday objects into elaborate punchlines. Student Bodies arrive too early to fully connect. It's more clever than hilarious, with jokes that work better in theory than execution. Still, it deserves credit for attempting genre satire before slashers became self-aware. A historical oddity that laid groundwork for later horror comedies. Return to Horror High, 1987. A low-budget film crew returns to a high school where multiple murders occurred years earlier, planning to dramatize the crimes for a cheap horror movie. As production begins, cast and crew start dying in ways that echo both the original murders and the scenes being filmed. The line between recreation and reality collapses as it becomes clear someone is using the production as cover. Directed by Bill Froelich, Return to Horror High experiments with meta-horror nearly a decade before it became mainstream. The ensemble includes an early appearance from George Clooney, alongside Laurie Lethan and Brendan Hughes. Performances vary, with actors often playing multiple layers of character, adding to the film's deliberate confusion. The structure constantly shifts between flashbacks, staged scenes, and real-time killings. Practical effects deliver standard slasher violence, stabbings, throat cuts, and sudden attacks, while the school setting provides familiar geography. The twist-heavy finale aims for cleverness, but ends up muddy rather than revelatory. The film's ideas are stronger than its execution. It gestures toward commentary on exploitation and horror filmmaking without fully committing to satire or suspense. Messy but ambitious, Return to Horror High is more interesting as a concept than a finished product. A rough sketch of where meta-horror would eventually go. Prom Night 2, Hello Mary Lou, 1987. Prom Night 2 is one of those sequels that barely connects to its predecessor. And that's exactly why it works. Instead of continuing the original's slasher storyline, this one reinvents the series as a slick, supernatural revenge tale with a mischievous streak. Set in the late 80s but haunted by the ghosts of the 50s, it turns a simple prom night setup into a stylish blend of teen melodrama, possession horror, and campy flair. The story centers on Mary Lou Maloney, a rebellious prom queen from 1957 whose tragic death becomes local legend. Decades later, her spirit is unleashed during prom season at the same high school, possessing an unsuspecting student and wreaking havoc on anyone who gets in her way. Director Bruce Pittman fills the movie with surreal dream sequences, fiery visuals, and practical effects that rival much bigger productions of the time. What makes Hello Mary Lou stand out is its confidence. It's playful but genuinely eerie, leaning into visual flair and gallows humor without ever losing its edge. Lisa Schrage's performance as the vengeful Mary Lou is magnetic, equal parts seductive and terrifying, and the film's high school setting gives it that perfect mix of nostalgia and danger. Over the years, Prom Night 2 has earned its place as one of the best horror sequels of the 80s. Bold, self-aware, and dripping with attitude. It's a reminder that sometimes the best follow-ups are the ones that throw the rulebook out the window and just have fun haunting the halls. Disturbing Behavior, 1998. If The Faculty was the cool kid of late 90s teen horror, Disturbing Behavior was its darker, moodier cousin. The one that sat in the back of the classroom and knew something was off. Released in 1998, it's a mix of the Stepford Wives and the X-Files, wrapped in flannel and post-grunge paranoia. Set in a seemingly perfect Pacific Northwest town, the film follows a group of outcast teens who discover their classmates are being brainwashed into obedient, violent model citizens. James Marsden, Katie Holmes, and Nick Stahl lead the cast, bringing surprising weight to what could have been pure pulp. The real story, though, is behind the scenes. The studio famously slashed nearly 30 minutes from director David Nutter's original cut, stripping away much of the mystery and world building. What's left still works. Moody cinematography, a great soundtrack, and that late 90s atmosphere where rebellion and conformity blur together. But the uncut version that surfaced later proved what fans suspected. This was meant to be more sci-fi tragedy than teen slasher. It flopped on release, overshadowed by Scream clones and its own marketing confusion. But it found life on VHS and cable, where its tone fit perfectly, that mix of angst, dread, and corporate horror that defined the decade. Disturbing Behavior isn't perfect, but it's endlessly rewatchable. It's what happens when 90s horror tries to say something real about control, rebellion, and identity, and nearly gets away with it. If you love discovering forgotten horror and cult cinema, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the films time forgot. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.